Before the story begins, imagine being 7 months pregnant, surrounded by hundreds of strangers, and hearing the person you trusted most erase your marriage with a smile. Stay with this story, because the humiliation in that ballroom is only the first crack in a much larger lie. And if you believe loyalty, family, and ordinary people deserve protection from powerful men, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are listening from. Now listen carefully to the first words Grant Keller chose to say. "Take off my ring before the investors notice." Grant Keller said it softly, almost kindly, which made the words cut deeper than a shout. Under the chandeliers of the Grand Allegheny Ballroom, 300 guests kept smiling into champagne glasses while Audrey Winslow Keller sat in the front row, 7 months pregnant, one hand resting over the child who had just kicked beneath her ivory dress. Stay with me, because the man celebrating the greatest night of his career had no idea the woman he was discarding owned the future he was begging to enter. A violin note trembled through the room. Cameras flashed. On stage, Grant looked flawless in a midnight blue tuxedo, his dark hair combed back, his gray eyes bright with the confidence of a man who believed every door opened because of him. Beside him stood Sloane Mercer in wine-red silk, one manicured hand wrapped around the microphone, the other resting too comfortably on Grant's arm. Keller Infrastructure would not be here without one extraordinary woman, Grant announced. Audrey's breath caught. For one foolish second, she thought he meant her. 7 years of revised bids, midnight spreadsheets, quiet introductions to suppliers who never asked why they trusted a company so young. 7 years of disappearing so he could look larger. Then Grant turned toward Sloane. "She understood my ambition when others asked me to slow down." Applause rolled across the ballroom. It sounded like rain hitting steel. Audrey did not move. Sloane accepted the praise with a smile sharp enough to draw blood, then leaned toward Grant as he removed his wedding band. The ring struck the glass podium, spun once, and fell flat. "Audrey and I have been living separate lives for some time," he continued. A lie delivered without blinking. "Tonight, I'm choosing honesty." Every camera swung toward her. Audrey felt heat climb her throat, but her face remained still. Her baby kicked again. Not fear this time. Warning. Grant stepped down from the stage and stopped beside her chair. "When I get home, Sloane will be with me," he murmured. "Pack what you need. Don't make this ugly." Sloane bent close enough for Audrey to smell her expensive perfume. Her green eyes dropped to the dark steel bracelet circling Audrey's wrist. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "I'll be sleeping in your house." Audrey looked at the bracelet her father had fastened around her wrist when she was 12, forged from the first steel poured by Winslow American Steel. Grant had always called it cheap. Her phone vibrated inside her clutch. One message glowed across the screen. "The board has voted. We need your signature, Chairwoman Winslow." Audrey closed the message before Grant could see it. Across the ballroom, a senior executive from Winslow Steel had gone pale after recognizing her. Grant followed her gaze, but noticed nothing. He was too busy enjoying the silence he mistook for surrender. Audrey slowly removed her wedding ring and placed it beside his untouched champagne. "Are you certain?" she asked. Grant smiled. "Completely." Audrey rose, smoothing one hand over her belly. The chandeliers caught her blonde hair like cold fire. "Good," she said. "Then tomorrow, neither of us will have to pretend." And somewhere beneath Pittsburgh, old steel began to wake. 7 years earlier, Grant Keller owned ambition, debt, and nothing. Audrey met him inside a rain-soaked Pittsburgh engineering conference lobby. His presentation board sagged, and his borrowed confidence sagged harder. Investors passed without stopping, already smelling desperation beneath his cologne. Audrey stopped because one calculation beneath a bridge was wrong. "Your load estimate ignores winter contraction," she said without judgment. Grant stared, corrected it, then watched investors finally approach him. That evening, he bought her coffee with his remaining cash. He told her Keller Infrastructure would someday reshape the city. She believed him before anyone else had reason to believe. What Grant never learned was why Audrey understood steel intimately. Her father taught metallurgy before teaching her ballroom etiquette properly. Winslow furnaces had thundered through every summer of her childhood. Yet she introduced herself simply as an independent materials researcher. She wanted love untouched by inheritance, headlines, or family leverage. For 18 months, Grant appeared worthy of that dangerous trust. He listened closely, remembered details, and thanked her after setbacks. When creditors circled, Audrey quietly rebuilt his entire bidding model. She corrected margins, renegotiated suppliers, and identified fraudulent subcontractors early. Then she made one discreet telephone call to Eleanor Winslow. A subsidiary awarded Grant a modest contract repairing warehouse supports. Grant called it the first proof of his inevitable greatness. Audrey remembered how he had once stood in their narrow kitchen, holding the contract with both hands because they were shaking. He had promised that if success ever came, he would never forget who had stayed when the bank stopped calling. She believed that promise long after his actions made it difficult to recognize. Years later, the memory hurt more than the gala. It proved arrogance had not always lived inside him. He had fed it, decision by decision, until gratitude became something he considered beneath him. Audrey called it temporary oxygen and never claimed the credit. More contracts followed because her recommendations protected workers and budgets. Grant assumed executives recognized brilliance whenever he entered their offices. He never noticed those executives first searching Audrey's quiet expression. Their wedding was small, private, and deliberately absent from newspapers. Grant promised they would remain partners when success finally arrived. Success arrived wearing tailored suits and demanding louder applause daily. Grant stopped saying we during interviews and investor dinners altogether. Audrey became my wife, then the woman handling things home. When she became pregnant, his gratitude curdled into polished irritation. Doctor appointments disrupted dinners where Grant preferred displaying uninterrupted power. Morning sickness embarrassed him whenever important clients visited their penthouse. Her exhaustion became evidence, in his mind, that ambition faded. Then Sloane Mercer arrived with sharpened cheekbones and perfect timing. She praised Grant's instincts before every risky decision he suggested. She laughed whenever Audrey questioned costs, schedules, or safety standards. Some women fear greatness, Sloane murmured after one tense dinner. Grant smiled as though she had diagnosed Audrey's deepest failure. Audrey noticed late meetings, unfamiliar perfume, and deleted hotel charges. She also noticed Keller Infrastructure's dependence becoming dangerously concentrated again. 82% of Grant's revenue flowed through Winslow-connected companies alone. He called that portfolio diversity during a televised business interview. Audrey watched from home, one hand covering their unborn daughter. Grant credited Sloane for opening doors Audrey had quietly built. Something inside Audrey did not break. It became suddenly measurable. She opened archived contracts Grant believed were ordinary corporate paperwork. Each agreement carried codes tracing directly toward Winslow American Steel. The pattern was undeniable, precise, and cruelly almost beautiful too. Grant's empire stood upon opportunities Audrey had placed beneath him. He had mistaken her invisible labor for his natural gravity. Upstairs, his message arrived asking whether she had packed yet. Audrey looked toward Pittsburgh's bridges and finally understood everything clearly. Keller Infrastructure entered October owing more than anyone publicly knew. 3 delayed projects had swallowed cash, patience, and investor confidence. Grant hid the crisis beneath interviews, champagne, and polished smiles. Only one contract could keep his collapsing empire breathing longer. Winslow American Steel was leading a $1 billion national infrastructure program. The winner would supply corrosion-resistant steel for national projects. Sloane promised Grant that victory had already been quietly guaranteed. She claimed powerful friends inside Winslow's secretive governing board itself. Grant believed her because arrogance often mistakes flattery for evidence. He never asked which director had supposedly made promises privately. Sloane's price arrived 3 nights after the gala humiliation. She placed 4 documents across Grant's black marble desk silently. Divorce papers waited beneath a newly drafted ownership agreement there. Sloane wanted equity, authority, and Audrey removed from everything permanently. Investors dislike complications, she said, touching his wedding photograph lightly. Grant did not defend Audrey, their child, or truth itself. He signed the ownership transfer before reading every page carefully. Then he ordered counsel to prepare Audrey's final settlement immediately. The settlement offered less than Grant spent entertaining clients monthly. It also demanded silence concerning his affair and finances forever. Audrey received the envelope while sorting tiny cotton clothes upstairs. Rain tapped the nursery windows like restrained fingernails that evening. She opened everything slowly, expecting cruelty but finding something stranger. Attached behind the settlement was a patent assignment bearing signatures. One signature belonged to Grant, the other perfectly imitated Audrey's. Audrey's breath stopped before her daughter kicked beneath her ribs. She had never signed the document. The patent covered a corrosion-resistant alloy Audrey developed privately. She created it years before marriage, before Grant ever appeared. Grant planned to use her invention to win the Winslow contract through fraud. Worse, Audrey recognized an internal classification number beside the patent. That code belonged exclusively to her family's protected research archives. Someone had accessed files Grant should never have known existed. Audrey called the attorney listed beneath the forged assignment immediately. His nervous pause answered more than his careful denial did. "Mrs. Keller, your husband provided authorization," he finally whispered. "Authorization from whom?" Audrey asked, though she already knew perfectly. Then silence filled the line, metallic, cold, and painfully revealing. Audrey ended the call and accessed Winslow's archived contract system. Her old credentials had expired years earlier, exactly as Winslow's security policy required. Audrey instead used the company's protected ethics portal, verified her identity through general counsel, and received temporary read-only access under a litigation hold protocol. There, she found Sloane's billion-dollar presentation package already waiting. The proposal displayed Audrey's alloy as Keller's proprietary innovation worldwide. It promised production capacity Grant's company simply could not provide. A second attachment listed subcontractors hidden behind anonymous corporations everywhere. One address appeared repeatedly across shipments, invoices, and shipping certifications. Audrey searched it and discovered an empty warehouse downtown nearby. Yet millions in steel orders flowed through that impossible location. She did not download or alter anything. She created a time-stamped report, preserved the original links, and sent the package to Winslow's general counsel and an outside forensic accounting firm. The distinction mattered. Audrey understood that evidence could become useless if gathered carelessly, and she refused to let Grant escape by claiming his wife had invaded a system or manipulated a file. Within 20 minutes, counsel confirmed that the records would be preserved on company servers before anyone at Keller Infrastructure learned an audit had begun. Her hands remained steady while her pulse became thunderous inside. This was no longer merely betrayal, humiliation, or stolen credit. Grant was gambling with contracts affecting bridges, hospitals, and children. Audrey placed both palms across her unborn daughter, guarding her. She had tolerated lies while believing only her heart suffered. But forged steel could bury strangers beneath somebody else's ambition. Audrey closed the nursery door and called Eleanor Winslow directly. Audrey called Eleanor Winslow after midnight, expecting silence, judgment, distance. Her grandmother answered before the second ring had fully sounded. "Come home," Eleanor said, without asking what had happened tonight. 1 hour later, a black sedan crossed Pittsburgh's sleeping bridges. Rain silvered the windows while Audrey watched old furnaces glow. Winslow American Steel rose beside the river like memory itself. The gates opened before the driver touched his identification card. No receptionist questioned Audrey's name, clothes, pregnancy, or trembling hands. They remembered her, though Grant had trained himself not to. The elevator descended instead of rising toward executive offices above. Eleanor waited underground beside the company's first surviving furnace chamber. At 68, she looked carved from winter, steel, and patience. Her silver blonde hair framed eyes that missed absolutely nothing important. She embraced Audrey carefully, one hand protecting the unborn child. That tenderness nearly broke what public humiliation had not touched. "I should have come sooner," Audrey whispered against her shoulder. "You came when staying became more dangerous," Eleanor replied quietly. They entered the original boardroom beneath exposed iron support beams. Audrey's father's chair remained empty at the table's far end. Beside it rested a small vault key, darkened with age. Eleanor placed it inside Audrey's palm and stepped backward silently. The vault contained no diamonds, crowns, or theatrical family portraits. It held voting certificates, patents, trusts, and one sealed letter. Her father's handwriting crossed the envelope like a familiar voice. Audrey opened it, and 7 years of hiding suddenly narrowed. Power reveals character only after love removes every disguise completely. Below that sentence, her inheritance terms were written plainly there. Audrey controlled 61% of all Winslow voting authority outright. Her alloy patent had never belonged to Keller Infrastructure legally. Every contract Grant celebrated had passed through Audrey's earlier recommendations. His empire had not eclipsed her. It had borrowed oxygen. Eleanor slid an emergency termination order across the polished table. Sign this, and Keller's company collapses before sunrise tomorrow morning. Audrey studied the signature line while her daughter moved inside. For one heartbeat, revenge seemed clean, immediate, and almost merciful. Then she remembered the warehouse, forged reports, and bridge contracts. If I destroy him now, the evidence disappears with him. Eleanor's expression changed, not softer, but deeper with recognition quietly. Audrey authorized an independent audit, directed counsel to preserve every relevant record, and asked the company's compliance officer to refer credible evidence to state and federal authorities. Only investigators and prosecutors could seek criminal warrants, and Audrey wanted that line respected. She ordered immediate testing on every Keller-supplied public structure nationwide. Contractual inspection rights allowed Winslow engineers to test material already supplied under its certifications, but public agencies would control any closure. The first calls went to project owners, city engineers, and transportation officials, not reporters. Audrey also required 2 outside laboratories to verify every preliminary result. If the danger was real, she wanted proof strong enough to survive both court and public scrutiny. Not one employee would lose wages during the investigation process. Not one family would cross an unsafe bridge unknowingly again. Eleanor watched her granddaughter choose responsibility before revenge, quietly proud. Now you understand why the chair waited, Eleanor said softly. Audrey fastened the steel bracelet tighter around her wrist again. Above them, furnaces roared like something ancient awakening underground nearby. Her phone buzzed with Grant's impatient message about signing papers. Another message followed, this one from Winslow's general counsel directly. Keller's presentation remained scheduled 4 days later. Grant still believed Sloane had secured the board's approval already. He still believed Audrey would arrive defeated and begging before the week ended. Audrey closed her father's letter, then claimed his empty chair. Let him present everything, she said, her voice becoming steel. I want every lie standing when the truth enters that room. The chair at the head of the Winslow boardroom had no nameplate. Grant noticed it immediately. Empty power always attracted him. He entered beneath cold blue lights with Sloane at his side. Both dressed like victory had already signed the contract. Outside the glass walls, Pittsburgh disappeared beneath winter rain. Inside, 12 directors waited in silence. At Audrey's instruction, the company's outside counsel, chief compliance officer, and 2 independent engineers also attended. Grant had received written notice that the board might question ownership, licensing, and safety representations. He had been offered the opportunity to bring counsel and supporting records. He brought Sloane instead, convinced that charm could accomplish what documents could not. No one offered champagne. No one smiled. Grant mistook restraint for intimidation. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, placing both hands on the steel conference table. Keller Infrastructure is prepared to transform the future of American construction. His voice filled the room with practiced certainty. Sloane advanced the presentation. Images of bridges, hospitals, rail systems, and city towers moved across the screen. At the center of every promise was Audrey's alloy. Grant described it as the result of years of private research led by his engineering division. He spoke of sacrifice, innovation, vision. Each stolen word arrived polished and rehearsed. Across the table, Winslow's general counsel lowered his eyes to hide something that might have been discussed. Sloane took over when the financial projections appeared. We have also secured informal support from members close to the controlling family, she said. The Winslow heiress has remained overseas for years. She has no operational involvement and no interest in returning. A director near the window slowly removed his glasses. You are certain? He asked. Sloane smiled. Completely. The same word Grant had used when Audrey asked whether he truly wanted to end their marriage. Then the steel doors opened. No announcement came first. Only the soft strike of heels against the floor. Audrey entered wearing an ivory maternity suit, her blonde hair gathered into a low knot, her dark steel bracelet circling one wrist. She paused beside counsel long enough to confirm that the preservation order had been served and that the city of Pittsburgh had received the engineer's preliminary report. Nothing about her entrance was improvised. The room had been prepared for facts, not revenge. She carried no folder. She needed none. Grant stared as though the room had produced a ghost for his private humiliation. Sloane recovered first. "This is a confidential meeting." Audrey continued walking. Grant stepped away from the table, anger returning wherever fear threatened to appear. "How did you get in here?" he demanded. "Security." Sloane snapped toward the doorway. "Remove her." No guard moved. Audrey stopped behind the empty chair. The unborn baby shifted beneath her jacket, a small movement only she felt. Grant laughed, but the sound broke in the middle. "Audrey, whatever performance this is, take it outside." Winslow's general counsel stood. One by one, every director followed. The room changed without raising its voice. "Mr. Keller," the counsel said, "allow me to introduce Audrey Claire Winslow Keller, majority owner of Winslow American Steel and incoming chairwoman of this board." Sloane's pen struck the floor. Grant did not blink. His face emptied before disbelief rushed back into it. He looked at Audrey's bracelet, then the director's, then the chair she had not yet taken. "That's impossible." Audrey placed one hand on the steel table. "No," she said. "It was merely inconvenient for you to notice." She sat. The directors followed. Grant remained standing because no one invited him to do otherwise. Audrey turned toward the screen, where her invention still appeared beneath Keller's logo. "Continue," she said. "I want to hear how much of my life you plan to sell." Grant opened his mouth, but Audrey lifted one finger. The screen went black. Then a new image appeared. The Marlow Bridge. Beneath it, in red letters, was a single line. "Structural failure risk. Immediate review required." Somewhere inside the walls, the ventilation system exhaled like a warning. Audrey looked directly at Grant. "Now," she said, "let us discuss what your ambition was willing to bury." The first document appeared before Grant could invent another denial. A purchase order glowed across the boardroom screen, its numbers clean, ordinary, and lethal. Keller Infrastructure had ordered certified Winslow alloy for the Marlow Bridge. But the delivery records showed something else entirely. Cheaper steel, lower tensile strength, no approved corrosion treatment. The room remained silent except for the soft pulse of rain against the glass. "That supplier was approved by procurement," Grant said. "I don't review every shipment." Audrey touched the control beside her chair. A second document replaced the first. His electronic signature sat beneath the substitution request. Date, time, location, all verified. Grant's jaw tightened. "Someone used my credentials." "Then perhaps the documented approval meeting will help," Audrey replied. The screen displayed the meeting notice, the attendance log, and the company policy Grant had signed each year consenting to the recording of executive compliance sessions. Then his own voice filled the room. Calm, impatient, unmistakable. "Use the cheaper material. We only need it to survive inspection. Once the Winslow contract clears, we replace the paper trail." Sloane went white. Grant turned toward her slowly. "You recorded me? You told me documentation protects intelligent people," she whispered. The next file exposed the shell company that supplied the steel. Mercer Industrial Holdings. Registered through 3 empty offices and controlled by Sloane's private trust. Millions had moved from Keller Infrastructure into that account, then into a luxury property purchased under both their names. The affair had not merely betrayed Audrey. It had become an accounting system. Sloane rose so quickly her chair struck the floor. Grant approved everything. He said the bridge was over-engineered. Grant stared at her. "You brought me the supplier. Because you demanded higher margins." Their alliance cracked in real time, not with a scream, but with 2 frightened people discovering loyalty had never existed between them. Audrey watched without satisfaction. That surprised Grant most. He had expected fury, humiliation, revenge. Instead, she looked tired. Then the forged patent transfer appeared. Her signature had been copied from prenatal insurance forms. A forensic specialist confirmed the manipulation, followed by access logs showing Sloane entering Winslow's protected archives with credentials purchased from a dismissed contractor. "You stole from my wife," Grant said, grasping for distance. Audrey's eyes lifted. She stole files. You submitted them. The final report opened. Engineers had found hairline fractures spreading beneath the Marlow Bridge's eastern support. School buses were scheduled to cross it during the public opening ceremony 3 days later. Grant gripped the table, but no one was hurt. Audrey's voice became almost gentle. Because I stopped the opening yesterday. More precisely, Winslow engineers had reported the preliminary findings to the city, and the city's bridge safety office had delayed the opening pending emergency inspection. Audrey had not closed a public bridge by personal command. She had made certain the officials with lawful authority received the evidence before a ribbon cutting could place families in danger. Images followed. Inspectors beneath the bridge, traffic barriers locking into place, families redirected before sunrise. The danger had been contained before the city ever knew how close it came. One director removed his glasses and whispered, "My granddaughter rides that route." Grant finally understood the room was no longer discussing a contract. Outside the doors, investigators waited to interview witnesses after prosecutors obtained judicially approved warrants supported by sworn affidavits. Keller's accounts had been frozen. The bridge project had been transferred to an independent safety team. Sloane backed away from Grant as though his ruin were contagious. Then he looked at Audrey's stomach. Desperation sharpened his face. "You can't take everything," he said. "That child is mine. Any inheritance connected to her gives me standing." The room went still again. Audrey placed both hands over her unborn daughter. Grant had lost his company, his lover, and his mask. Yet he was still reaching for something he believed he could own. Audrey met his eyes. "Then we will let a judge explain the difference between fatherhood and entitlement." The courthouse doors opened with a groan that sounded older than mercy. Audrey entered beneath white fluorescent lights, one hand supporting her back, the other resting over the daughter Grant had already begun treating like an asset. Outside, cameras crowded the marble steps. Inside, no one applauded. This was not a gala. Truth did not need music. Grant arrived 10 minutes later in a charcoal suit, flanked by 2 attorneys, and the expression of a man still convinced confidence could replace evidence. Sloane came separately. She avoided his eyes. The first proceeding was a federal civil hearing on the forged patent assignment, misuse of proprietary technology, preservation of company records, and disputed licensing revenue. A separate Pennsylvania family court hearing concerning divorce finances and temporary protective orders was scheduled later that week. Audrey's lawyers refused to blend 2 systems simply because Grant had mixed his marriage with his fraud. Grant's attorney began with emotion disguised as law. He argued that Winslow was using corporate power to destroy a smaller competitor before the facts had been tried. The judge reminded both sides that the hearing was temporary and limited. No one was being convicted that morning, but the court could preserve evidence, restrain disputed funds, and prevent further use of a contested invention while the case proceeded. Mrs. Keller is using extraordinary wealth to punish a husband for ending an unhappy marriage. Audrey said nothing. The attorney described her as secretive, vindictive, and unstable. He suggested her return to Winslow American Steel had been planned to humiliate Grant publicly. At the later family hearing, Grant's lawyers claimed Audrey's support of Keller infrastructure had commingled family wealth with marital property. Audrey's counsel answered with 7 years of ledgers showing that every Winslow-related payment had been made by separate corporate entities under written contracts or documented loans. Her inherited shares had never entered a joint account, secured a marital debt, or been transferred to Grant. The judge noted that parenthood did not create control over a spouse's separate estate or over future gifts placed in a properly administered trust for a child. Audrey's attorney rose without drama. She did not begin with the affair. She began with dates. The alloy patent had been registered 3 years before Audrey met Grant. The Winslow Voting Trust had been created before the marriage. The penthouse, medical accounts, and controlling shares were separate property. None could be claimed through divorce. None could be reached through the unborn child. Then came the forged transfer. A forensic analyst demonstrated how Audrey's signature had been lifted from prenatal insurance forms and placed onto patent documents. Access records connected Sloane to the stolen files. Grant's submission history proved he had presented the invention as his own. Grant shifted in his chair. Next came the Marlow Bridge. Photographs of fractured support joints appeared on the courtroom monitor. Engineers explained what could have happened when the first school bus crossed the eastern span. No one used the word catastrophe. They did not need to. Sloane's attorney requested permission to speak. She identified Grant as the person who approved the material substitution and ordered the records concealed. Grant turned toward her, betrayal flashing across his face as though he had forgotten betrayal could travel in both directions. Finally, Audrey stood. She wore no diamonds. Only the dark steel bracelet her father had given her. "I hid my name because I wanted to know why he loved me," she said. "For 7 years, I believed silence protected my marriage. It only protected his lies." Grant stared at the floor. A failed marriage is not the issue before this court. The issue is whether Grant may reach property tied to a forged document, a company placed at risk, and a future trust he has already discussed as leverage. The rulings came in stages. The federal court temporarily barred Keller Infrastructure from using Audrey's alloy, ordered preservation of records, and restrained disputed licensing revenue. The family court later rejected Grant's attempt to control the Winslow shares or any future trust for the child, while reserving ordinary marital property questions for the divorce process. Criminal charges, the judge emphasized, would be decided only after prosecutors completed their investigation and a grand jury reviewed the evidence. When the gavel fell, Sloane walked past Grant without looking back. He called Audrey's name once. She paused at the courthouse doors but did not turn. Behind her, Grant stood surrounded by lawyers, cameras, and silence, the first things in his life his money could no longer command. 14 months later, the first car crossed the rebuilt Marlow Bridge beneath a pale Pittsburgh sunrise. No champagne waited. No orchestra played. Families stood behind temporary barriers, holding coffee, children, and the ordinary hopes Grant had once treated like acceptable risk. Audrey watched from the crowd with Grace Eleanor Winslow asleep against her chest, wrapped in a white wool blanket. Audrey had become chairwoman 3 weeks after Grace's birth. She refused the victory portrait the board prepared and spent her first morning inside the mill, speaking with welders, inspectors, and night shift families. Every worker suspended during the investigation received full pay. Every engineer who warned about Keller's fraud received protection. Power, Audrey decided, should first repair what ambition had endangered. Grant's company did not survive the criminal case. The process had not happened overnight. Auditors spent months tracing invoices. Engineers testified about specifications. Grant's own counsel challenged the recordings, the searches, and the chain of custody. Courts reviewed those objections before the case moved forward. In the end, the evidence survived because Audrey had insisted from the beginning that every step be lawful. Its projects were transferred, its contracts dissolved, and its assets sold to repay cities and suppliers. Sloane accepted a plea agreement and testified. Grant kept insisting Audrey had destroyed him until the sentencing judge placed the bridge photographs before him and asked one question: which child should have paid for your success? Grant never answered. For the first time, silence belonged to him. Audrey did not attend the sentencing. She was in a pediatric wing funded through a Winslow Safety Foundation, signing scholarships for children of steelworkers. On the wall behind her hung no family crest, only a photograph of the furnace and one sentence from her father: "Build what protects people." Grace was old enough to reach for the bracelet on Audrey's wrist, but too young to understand why the adults around the bridge kept looking at her mother with gratitude. Audrey preferred it that way. A child should inherit safety before she inherits a story about betrayal. During the months before the reopening, Audrey had attended every public safety update without taking the microphone. She sat beside bus drivers, neighborhood leaders, and the families whose routines had been disrupted by the closure. When an elderly shop owner complained that the detour had nearly ruined his business, she did not defend the company. She arranged temporary grants for affected merchants and asked the city to publish weekly repair schedules. Winslow had not caused every delay, but Audrey believed leadership began where excuses ended. The bridge became safer piece by piece. Defective members removed, bearings replaced, drainage corrected, inspection records placed online. By the time Grace learned to stand, the community no longer had to rely on a billionaire family's promise. They could read the tests themselves. Audrey also asked the city to appoint a permanent citizen safety panel, including a school bus driver, a retired bridge inspector, and a parent from the neighborhood. Their questions would be entered into the public record, and engineers would answer them in plain language. Trust, she had learned, was not restored by demanding belief. It was restored by making secrecy unnecessary. At the bridge ceremony, reporters searched for a spectacle. They wanted Audrey beside a podium, perhaps holding the forged papers or describing the moment Grant begged. Instead, she stood among bus drivers and mothers while Grace slept against her heartbeat. When the ribbon fell, the first school bus rolled forward. Audrey's fingers tightened around the steel bracelet on her wrist. A journalist recognized her and pushed through the crowd. "Mrs. Winslow, do you feel you took everything from your former husband?" Cameras turned. The question hung between river mist and steel cables. Audrey looked toward the bus crossing safely above the water, then down at her daughter's peaceful face. "No," she said. "He only lost what was never truly his." She walked away before another question could turn dignity into entertainment. Eleanor waited near the river railing, silver hair lifting in the wind. She did not praise Audrey's victory. She simply touched Grace's blanket and nodded toward the bridge. That was enough. Some approval arrives as applause. The kind that matters most often comes quietly, after the danger has passed. That evening, Audrey returned to the house she had chosen near the river. It was smaller than the penthouse and warmer in every way that mattered. She placed Grace in a cradle beside the window, removed the steel bracelet, and fastened it around the handle of a keepsake box. Inside rested her father's letter, one discarded wedding ring, and silence. Outside, Pittsburgh's bridges burned gold against the dark. Audrey lifted her daughter when she began to stir, holding her close as fingers closed around nothing and trusted everything. Grant had spent years trying to own the future, believing money made life negotiable. Audrey asked for no monument. She had already built the legacy that mattered, something safe enough to cross. This story is fictional. Names, characters, companies, locations, and events are created or dramatized for entertainment purposes.